So let's talk about a single court case from 1978 that totally changed the game for personal liberty in India. It all started with something that sounds almost simple. A journalist's passport was taken away. But what happened next? Well, it ended up giving fundamental rights a kind of power they just didn't have before. This is the incredible story of Menka Gandhi versus the Union of India.
Okay, so how did this one case have such a huge, massive impact? Here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll get into the core idea of fairness, what was really at stake. Then we'll take a look at what the law was like before all this went down, and of course, what actually happened to Menka Gandhi to kick off this whole battle. And then we'll get to the really good part, the court's game-changing decision and this powerful idea created called the Golden Triangle.
All right, first up, the right to be heard. Now, before we even touch on the passport or the courtroom drama, we have to get our heads around this one universal principle of fairness. Seriously, it's at the absolute heart of this whole story.
So think about this for a second. Can the government just take away your rights without even telling you why? That's it. That's the fundamental question that drove this entire case all the way to India's Supreme Court. See, when the government went after Menka Gandhi, they just refused to explain themselves. And that refusal, it sparked a massive constitutional showdown.
And at the very heart of this is an old Latin saying, audi alteram partem. It literally means, hear the other side. It's a super simple but really profound idea that, no one should be judged or have something taken from them without a fair hearing, without a chance to tell their side of the story. It's pretty much the definition of legal fair play.
Okay, moving on to liberty on a leash. Now, to really get why the Menka Gandhi case was such a bombshell, we've got to jump in a time machine. Let's go back to the India of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. This was a time when the whole idea of personal liberty was, well, it was interpreted in a much, much tighter way. And for almost 30 years, this was the rule. The big case that set the standard was called A.K. Gopalan. And what the court said back then was basically that as long as the government followed the letter of the law, the exact words written down, they were good to go. It didn't matter if the law was actually fair or not. If there was a procedure on the books, that was enough. End of story.
And this really breaks down the two big ideas that were clashing. On one side, you've got procedure established by law. This was the way India was doing things. It's super literal. If a law exists and has steps, you just follow the steps. You don't ask if the law itself is fair. But then you have the American idea of due process of law. This is way more holistic. It asks the big question, hey, is this law itself fair, just, and reasonable? It lets courts look under the hood. And what's wild is that the people who wrote India's constitution intentionally chose the first, more restrictive option.
Okay, so that's the world they were living in, legally speaking. Pretty restrictive. Now let's get to the spark that lit the whole fire. A passport seized. The timing here is absolutely critical. This all went down in mid-1977, just a few months after India came out of a period called the emergency, where fundamental rights had basically been suspended. So yeah, the stage was definitely set for a major showdown.
And this timeline really lays it all out. You've got that restrictive A.K. Gopalan ruling way back in 1950. And it just sits there as the law for 27 years. Then, boom, 1977, Menka Gandhi's passport is suddenly taken away. And just a few months later, in early 78, the Supreme Court drops a judgment that's about to turn that entire 27-year-old precedent on its head.
So here are the raw facts. You've got the petitioner, journalist Menka Gandhi. The government orders her to surrender her passport. And when she asks why, what reason do they give? Nothing. They literally just said it was in the interest of the general public. That's it. They were basically saying, we don't have to explain ourselves to you. And that refusal to give a reason, was the trigger for the whole case. Okay, and this brings us to the climax of the story, the court's paradigm shift. This is it. This is the moment the Supreme Court steps in and delivers a decision that is going to completely revolutionize Indian constitutional law. For good.
So in a pretty stunning move, the court just completely overruled that old 1950s decision from the A.K. Gopalan case. They basically said, nope, not anymore. They declared that just having a law on the books isn't good enough. The procedure written into that law, it has to be actually fair. And honestly, this one quote from Justice P.N. Bhagwati says it all. The procedure must be right and just and fair, and not arbitrary, fanciful, or oppressive. Wow. With those words, the court basically breathed new life into Article 21 of the Constitution. A procedure wasn't just a checklist anymore. It had to be, well, it had to have a conscience. So what this created was a brand new 3-step test for any law that takes away liberty. Step 1, sure, it has to have a procedure. But step 2, that procedure has to be fair and reasonable. And step 3, the law itself can't be arbitrary. It was a huge deal. The court essentially took the spirit of that due process idea and baked it right into Indian law.
And this is where all the pieces come together to form the most lasting impact of this case, something called the Golden Triangle's power. Let's check out how this new, higher standard for liberty created one of the most powerful protections for fundamental rights that exists today.
So the first side of this triangle connects to Article 14, the right to equality. The court said any procedure has to be non-arbitrary. It has to treat people equally. You can't just single someone out for no good reason.
The next side of the triangle connects to Article 19, the right to freedom. We're talking freedom of speech, freedom to move around, all that good stuff. And the court made a brilliant point. What good are those freedoms if your personal liberty can just be snatched away whenever, unfairly?
And the third and most critical point of the triangle is Article 21 itself, the right to life and personal liberty. This is the linchpin, but now it's been supercharged. It has to meet the high standards of fairness and equality from those other 2 articles.
And there you have it. That's the Golden Triangle, Articles 14, 19, and 21. They're not seen as separate things anymore. They're all interconnected. They have to work together. So now, if the government wants to restrict your personal liberty under Article 21, that action also has to be reasonable, like Article 19 requires, and non-arbitrary, like Article 14 demands. An attack on one is now an attack on all 3.
So why does all this matter? What's the bottom line? It's this. The court completely expanded the meaning of life. The right to life doesn't just mean you get to exist, to breathe. It means you have the right to live with human dignity. And that dignity has to be protected by laws that aren't just words on a page, but are actually fair and just. It was a massive statement about the power of the individual. So yeah, this case completely redefined liberty in India. But it also leaves us with a really powerful question to think about, right? If a procedure can be perfectly legal but still totally unfair, what other established rules should we be questioning to make sure we have real justice? It's a reminder that the line between what's written down as legal and what's actually just is something we should probably never stop questioning.